When testing the Saginaw integral power steering gear for play or excess wear, the steering wheel should always be on center, with the front wheels pointed straight ahead. Before checking the steering gear for leaks, make certain that the power steering pump, hoses, and tubing are not leaking. Inspect hoses carefully for leaks and abrasions. Flare tubing seats and O-ring seals must not leak. When inspecting the integral power steering gear for leaks, check the stub shaft and worm seal. This seal is located at the top of the steering gear. This worm or stub shaft seal is obviously leaking and has been leaking for some time. The worm or stub shaft seal is a common leak point on Saginaw integral power steering. A leak here is often the reason for a resealed overhaul. The other common seal leak is at the sector shaft. Aftermarket lift kits with dropped pitman arms place additional leverage on the sector shaft and seal. On this Jeep application of Saginaw integral power steering, the sector shaft seal is leaking as well. Failure of both the sector seal and the sector bearing is not uncommon with oversized tires and a dropped pitman arm. Gripping the pitman arm and rocking the sector sideways or checking for lateral play reveals that the sector bearing and the seal have movement. Sector tooth backlash or play can cause some of this lateral movement, but in this case, the lateral movement is excessive, and this indicates wear at the sector bearing that is also placing a side load on the seal. To check sector adjustment or for sector wear, with the steering gear on absolute center, grip the pitman arm with one hand and rotate the worm or coupler with the other hand. Rock the steering coupler back and forth gently, observing how much rotation takes place before the pitman arm moves. With proper sector adjustment, there should be no perceptible play over center. If the sector has wear or the sector bearing is worn, as in this case, you can see the sector shaft moving sideways rather than rotating the pitman arm back and forth. Sector shaft and or the sector bearing is worn in this case. On disassembly of the gear, that would be an area for inspection, and likely the sector bearing, at the minimum, would require replacement in addition to the reseal of the gear. At this stage of wear, likely the bearing should be replaced, but the shaft and the teeth on the sector head are still okay. Close inspection of the sector shaft and the sector teeth, as well as the rack piston teeth, will take place once this gear is disassembled. At this point, it is clear that the parts order will include a seal kit as well as a sector bearing. These parts can be procured before the gear is removed from the chassis and disassembled for rebuilding. Always inspect the steering linkage and other components in the steering system before removing the steering gear from the chassis. Saginaw rotary valve integral power steering is reliable and long-lasting. In this particular application, with a 6-inch drop pitman arm and oversized tires, the gear does show wear, although it still has seen 162,000 miles of service. This gear will now be removed from the chassis for teardown, inspection, a reseal, and precision adjustment of both the sector and worm bearings. This gear can be restored to as new condition. Once it is determined that a Saginaw rotary valve power steering gear can be rebuilt, the common parts are readily available. If there is obvious wear and play in a Saginaw steering gear, remove the unit for teardown inspection, resealing, precision adjustments, and rebuilding of worn or damaged components. If you encounter gear housing, piston rack, or sector damage, you need to find a matching rebuildable steering gear core or a rebuilt gear from a reputable source. This Saginaw rotary valve gear housing has been severely damaged, likely from debris running through the power steering system. The additional metal sloughing from this gear housing wall adds to the damage and further chews up the wall. When a pump fails, the metal debris can also cause this kind of damage to an otherwise rugged Saginaw steering gear. The piston shown here shows scoring damage as well. An attempt to rebuild this gear would prove futile. The seals would not hold, and the sector seal will fail from the bypassing pressure. The grooves from wear will tear up the Teflon seals. Avoid mixing parts between gears, as the tooth contact pattern between the piston rack teeth and the sector teeth must match up.